6:30 p.m., Tuesday, February 18th, 6:34 p.m. I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. Start with our usual announcements. The meeting is being recorded by 1623 Studios for future broadcasts, also being taped by Gail Hunter for accuracy in minutes. Anyone else who is recording the meeting is asked to notify the chair at this time. And if you could take a moment to silence or turn off your cell phones, we would all appreciate it so we don't get interrupted. Item number 0 on the agenda is an opportunity for anybody who has a comment or something which is not on the agenda to speak. Does anybody have anything that they need to say that's not on the agenda tonight? All right, let's move on to item number 1, which is short-term paying guest applications for 23 School Street and 54 Union Street. So we have 2 separate applications. The applications paperwork seems to be in order. Questions from the board members?
No. I guess just maybe the one comment I'd make is, though I appreciate all the information, I don't know as we need it. Maybe just some kind of check off that says all of the different areas and departments have done their thing and we're good. Yeah. It saves on everybody's time and paper and.
All right, anybody from the public have any comment on either of these short-term paying guest applications? All right, in that case, can I get a motion to approve the short-term paying guest applications at 23 School Street and 54 Union Street?
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That was kind of easy, right? You thought we were going to grill you?
You're welcome to do
Sorry.
that.
You just get all the paperwork done. It's pretty straightforward.
Thank you for doing all the paperwork. See ya.
Okay, let's move on to item number 2 on the agenda, which is the athletics field master plan. And for this,
Excellent idea.
we will welcome Ms. Cheryl Marshall. And yes, grab the microphone and
This
test
thing
and test.
on?
Is that live? Yeah.
That'll work.
And you do have to speak closely into it. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cheryl Marshall, Director of Parks and Recreation. Thank you to the Park and Recreation Committee for coming tonight. Olga Hayes, Sean Daly, Mike Coyne, and Todd Johnson, thanks. So we have been working for the past year on an athletic field master plan with Weston and Sampson and Cass Croust from there. And I'm going to pretty much turn it over to him and let him do the talking. But I know we sent in your packets this pretty much the same plan, but I kind of minimized it so your packets wouldn't be so thick. And we have it tonight for you. And I'm going to turn it over to Cass from Weston and Sampson to tell you the process. And I know most of the questions were about the financing for the design phase, so I'm just going to have them go over it quickly and then get to that part as well.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Cass Croust. I'm a landscape architect with Weston and Sampson. I'm fortunate enough to live actually nearby here, so this means a bit to me more than usual. I live in Essex, so I'm nearby. And I have 2 little girls that will attend Manchester, Essex. So the one thing, I'll keep this fast, just to really kind of get down to the brass tacks and questions for you if you have anything to discuss. But this is a presentation that we've gone around. We've met with a lot of different folks, a lot of different town committees as well. And to kind of give you a clue as to what we've done here, we've got tasks or milestones that we've gone through. So we've had a couple of public meetings. We've done a public input survey. We've done numerous stakeholder meetings, meeting with CPA, Concom, Planning Board, you folks now as well. So we're just kind of making sure everybody gets this presented in front of them so they can see what's going on and understand what we're trying to achieve here. What we are doing is we are trying to basically step back at the beginning to assess the athletic field situation for the town of Manchester by the Sea. And so what we've done is with that, we've taken our professional assessment and evaluating the fields by going out and seeing all the facilities, but also through of the public engagement process. And that was done through an online survey, but also through that public meeting process that I'd gone through before. So we're at the later stage here where we've aggregated and synthesized all that information, and now we've kind of arrived at a few final draft concepts that we're hoping to kind of finalize officially for the final report that we want to finish. And what I'll go through now is just, we're really talking about 3 different sites here that are having proposed improvements. One is at Sweeney Park, and I'll go into that in just a little bit, but looking at how we can improve that. That does include cost estimates for Sweeney Park. We did go a little bit further on that facility just because of Cheryl's goal of trying to kind of push that to that next step. But the other facilities that we're looking at making improvements on are at Pine Street. In terms of adding rectangular field space, we've found that there's been a shortage of rectangular field space in town, and so we're trying to figure out different ways to alleviate that through existing facilities that we have, but also through facilities that don't have anything on them today or that are potentially available. So that's one of the aspects we came up with for Pine Street, the associated cost estimate with that as well. And then lastly, just some improvements to Masconomo. Those are some minor improvements, really. Regrading pathway, one of the things we always think about when we're making improvements is ADA accessibility and how that can start to really help create multi-generational spaces throughout town. So that's kind of the process that we've been to. And so now we're here in front of you. One of the things we really wanted to talk about, I think, is diving deeper into Sweeney, as that is kind of the highest action item that we've developed so far. And so that plan in front of you is the 11 by 17 larger sheet there. And to accompany that with the cost estimate that's on sheet number 5. It's this one with the blue tables and multiples there. What was up to walk this through? So, as we go through, one thing I want to highlight here is that we're trying to renovate the existing rectangular field space that's there that overlaps with the outfield of the softball field. And what we're trying to look at doing is solve an issue in town where you have too many hours of use for natural grass fields. And so that's why what we're looking to propose is a synthetic turf field, because it can handle as many hours as you can throw on it. It's had success at Brook Street and is used throughout by the town, but also by the school as well. And this is something we're trying to replicate here at Sweeney. And so what this would have, this would keep the softball field in place, but it would have inlaid striping in the synthetic turf to expand and create that large rectangular field space. Manchester doesn't have quite a lot of open flat spaces that can handle this type of field size. So we're looking to hope to expand that. In fact, the black dotted line here to the bottom right corner there is the existing tree line. So we're actually looking to expand that to handle larger, more older kid play, basically, to help the high school or organized sports to have a better place to go and more space to use. We are trying to limit that synthetic turf area by keeping the warm-up area natural grass. I do want to point out that the parking lot and pathway system would be done by others in a separate phase, as that's something that Cheryl has been working on with a different group. Were you working on that? With DPW. And so that would be done by others, but this would look at how that whole property would be improved in that regard. Should I go through this estimate? So I just want to quickly, or do you have any questions? You want me to walk through the cost estimate? How would I best help you with any questions or conversation points you might have?
Cost estimate's fine.
Just go through it? Perfect, okay. So what we've done is we've broken this down into several different groups. The top left table shows really just the construction cost of the field itself. And so we've broken that down into site prep, the synthetic turf field itself, the softball amenities, and that would include things like the team bench areas and the ADA pathways leading up there as well. And then also just general landscape improvements from disturbance that you would have to do. One thing we always include, we do include mobilization and contingency. And then also we want to include a design fee to show that. And also at the very bottom, there's an inflation allowance that says, basically over time, this is subject to increase. We just want to make it a known entity that if you push these projects out forward, they tend to cost more. We're in a very busy time where construction is at a premium at the moment. And so the longer you wait, costs tend to escalate over time. And so that's just a nod to say, if you push this out over year, in terms of a request you might want to make later, that would have to be raised accordingly. Below that, there's a bathroom facility that we've pulled that out to say if that is an option that you want, that could be done on a phased basis or as a separate project basis. And in total, that would cost $475,000. I did jump ahead too much. The total fee for the synthetic turf field, including the softball field, would be $1.462 million. And then that does not include the supplemental services that would be like subsurface testing. Think of like test pits, borings, things like that you'd want to explore to make sure you're doing all your due diligence, survey work, things like that. The NOI, the notice of intent that you would go through COMCOM, just given the resource areas that are potentially nearby. You want to do wetland flagging and things like that to make sure you're accounting for all those things. And so that total would cost approximately $37,000 as well. And the design fee would be, we've shown that out to be $133,000, which represents 10% of the overall construction cost, which is a pretty standard fee percentage.
I'm just curious, where are we coming up with the 910 for the turf?
So Weston and Sampson, we have a lot of experience constructing synthetic turf fields. We're constructing one right now in Wayland. And so these are construction costs we have. These are up-to-date costs that we've run through cost estimates where we have a detailed version of a cost estimate. We're trying to keep it high level in this format for now, but we do have those detailed ones where it goes through where it talks about fine grading, rough grading, the layers of stone that are incorporated within that profile, the synthetic turf system itself, the curbing, the paving, the fencing, everything like that.
So that's everything?
From the synthetic
910.
turf field itself, yes.
Right, okay. And, sorry, does this plan use the existing lighting that's already there, or is there new lighting that would have to be installed?
This plan does include, this plan includes the existing lighting that's
Right,
there.
okay.
However, the recommendation that we've done is to do borings, and one thing that would be highly recommended is to, with synthetic turf fields, it would behoove you to light the field because it can handle as many hours as you can possibly throw at it. And that's the benefit versus grass. Grass has a limited number of hours per year that is before it deteriorates and becomes a detrimental surface.
So the lights that are positioned now wouldn't do the trick to light a new field?
It could. We could work with that. We've actually talked with Musco. We're still investigating whether the light locations, would it be ideal? No. And that's something that you would have to weigh on whether it's worth it or not. The system is older now as well. They've made dramatic improvements in technology in terms of
Well,
the
that's
throw
what I
of
was
light and where it
wondering.
goes.
Yeah,
We would recommend a new lighting system. And at the very least, what we would say is within that, in terms of to make it being aware of the capital cost, those are very expensive systems. If you're putting in the synthetic turf system, you're disturbing the site, that would be a great time to put in
Right.
conduit and footings for future lighting, and you can then put in a new lighting system when you have appetite for that
because
capital investment.
there's no lighting, no new lighting system within these numbers, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know how old the lighting system is there?
Oh,
1999,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And
Maybe older than
what is
that.
the lifespan of the specific turf field?
So turf has improved over time. The technology has gotten better. It ranges between 12 and 15 years before you start to have to replace the carpet itself.
Is that dependent upon use?
In general, that's just generally, I'd say it's more dependent on maintenance. So basically, if you maintain it appropriately and decently, it'll last you about 12 to 15 years. And then in terms of the replacement cost, you already have that drainage stone, which should still
Right.
hold. It's really just
It's the
replacing
carpet.
the carpet system.
And you say the maintenance, and that was one of my questions as
Right.
well, is what costs are involved in the maintenance? And
So
and how frequently?
So that depends. There's a couple different avenues where the cost would come from. That would be the labor, the DPW work. That would be, I assume they'd be the ones that are taking care of that maintenance effort, and that would involve annual grooming and things like that. Things they probably should be doing already at the high school and at Brook Street. And also, you'd have to clean it with an agent, just because that's what you're supposed to do. But other than that, it's there's not much else. Maybe some clean out work in terms of things like that along the perimeter drain.
And then, so it's the cost, but do you have a general idea of what the cost is annually for that kind of a maintenance of a turf field?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to provide that. We have that data for sure. was looking at it the other day. I just cannot
Is
remember.
that something, is that built in already,
Well, I
Cheryl?
feel like in one of our iterations of the plan, we did go through that because it was a question in
That's right. We did go through the exercise. I
I'm
don't
sure
have it
you
on my
have. I know
fingertips.
it's-
Yes,
that's-
contracting it out. but,
that's right.
yeah.
And then, are there any questions? I know that there were some concerns with MRSA at one point on turf fields.
I think that's part of that cleansing process that
cleansing.
I was just mentioning, is
Okay.
that's what you're supposed to do.
Okay. And do you know how much it would be, the additional cost from the DPW to do the parking and the, all that? Have you got those figures at all?
No, we have kind of a separate project going on that, being headed up by Nate in DPW right now.
And as far as my last question is regarding the wetland area and encroaching on that. Having spent a lot of time down at that field with very wet feet, how would you mitigate that? Isn't that something that you might have a little trouble with in terms of proximity?
That's something we'd have to figure out within the design process itself. I think that's where you'd have to figure out with test pits what the infiltration rate is and whether that is. So essentially that stone layer base, one benefit of that is it actually creates what is effectively a large retention chamber system. And so that's the one benefit, is it can hold a significant amount of water, and then you're able to control that through a weir system to release it on a controlled basis. And if there's any post-treatment that would need to be there, there is space requirements for that, and we'd have to figure out a good place to do that. We do have the warm-up area now.
Yep.
That we could start to think of like drainage swale, basically another way to kind of help cleanse that water before it go. But that's something we'd have to work out through that NOI process and the stormwater report and things like that.
And did you mention Concom was one of the groups you've already been to?
That's right,
To kind
yes.
of give an overview, or what was their feedback?
So it was just the overview phase.
Right.
And, they weren't negative, they appreciated us kind of coming to town, but we, were also there to hopefully get any input or any help in
Right.
direction, and, they really thought we had things going.
Okay,
And I think that's one thing we're trying to do is
right.
landscape architects. That's part of our duty is ecological resiliency and things like that. And so that's why we're trying to work within the existing footprint as much as possible, yet also being mindful of the needs of the town. And that's why we're trying to think of if we can expand into that wooded area just a little bit. It buys a whole extra space that's important for that type of play. But in terms of going up to the northeast, we're trying to not disturb that in any way. And so that's why we limited that expansion point.
Yeah, and
So we're trying to be mindful as much as possible.
I'm just curious that, it is so wet and
Oh,
all
yeah.
that situation.
It's a wonderful question, yeah.
And site prep, I mean, without knowing really just how much work would be involved in terms of mitigating the dampness.
I think that's it, and I think we'd have to figure out where the water table lies, what the infiltration rate is of everything. I think that's through that survey process would really be informative to really nail down what that would be. But the one benefit is that it is generally flat in regards to there, so it's not, the grading is close. You could modify that in certain ways to help kind of, depending on what the results would be, hopefully an easy solution to just maybe if you have to raise it up just a little bit.
And that cleaning solution is not a problem with the getting into the water?
There's organic solutions. That's something we want to vet and go through the Conservation Commission process to make sure they are completely on board with all processes.
Which they would know more than I would for sure, so, but thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any way to account for the former skate park as part of the plan, or is that's just not possible?
We've talked about that in many number of ways. I think at the last they're talking about that right now that will be the staging area for the school construction work. We wonder if that is still the case. I think what they're talking about too is that those could be potentially either pickleball courts or something that's in terms of whether, depending on Conservation Commission, if that's a good opportunity to give a portion of that or all of that back to that ecological area. But all things that would need to be vetted out, I think.
And my other question, and I grew up playing on that field, but I don't know the current logistical or kind of planning capability. There is no way to get another field in there by moving the entrance to the east side of that abutment of 127? So you move the parking lot basically.
On the other end of it?
Move the entrance over here and put the parking kind of in the warm-up area,
Yep.
And then slide some sort of a field area on this side.
We looked at several different layout possibilities. I think we're trying to find the
Is it
right
right?
balance between
That wouldn't,
basically capital improvements and cost savings versus
There's a
trying to
culvert
alleviate
right
the needs
there.
that were present. And so that's kind of where we arrived at,
a
leaving the
culvert
baseball
right
field that
there.
has a lot of sweat equity in that facility already as well.
Oh, yeah, but I like what you did with the dual-purpose baseball field there, and, is there ability, in terms of long-term planning, maybe not for this round, but is there a long-term viability of another space for some sort of large playing field area by flipping the parking lot in the field? But that,
Yeah,
There is,
there's a
it is,
yeah,
it's
there's
an
a brook and
intermittent
a
stream,
culvert.
I believe, and so there is resources
Yep.
over there, and I think
Yep.
from that, from an
But I
ecological
guess-
perspective, it's better to keep
Yeah.
that pavement
yeah,
away
and
from there.
I'm aware of the wetland area, I was just, and again, that's where my ignorance comes into play. But I was just curious whether or not you could do it over the basketball court, because that's why I was asking about the skate park, whether or not that actually could become the basketball area.
Basketball court.
Oh, yeah, we looked at a lot of different parking scenarios to do that. To basically, we're trying to expand the fields as much as possible, because really the town needs as much
I'm sure
space
you
as
looked
they
at
can
it.
possibly
I
get.
keep going back to just
thought
the
about
need for field space in
putting
town,
basketball
and
courts there.
we have such little to play with that
Exactly
I'm
right.
assuming we're exhausting every
Is there enough
creative
room?
option.
And we looked at that for sure.
I don't think,
So I have a few questions.
Okay.
Let's go back to the turf field briefly. So 910 all in for the installation, 12 to 15 year replacement, and when you replace, you have a significantly smaller cost on the replacement, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's about 350, 400-ish.
In that sort of range. All right. Okay,
Yep.
good. And we already talked about water, although.
And the Brook Street carpet is in need of replacement sometime soon.
Yeah, I'll get to that one in just a second.
Okay,
oh, yeah.
just that way.
So the drainage work that's being planned, who's doing the engineering on that? Is that the DPW guys for the Sweeney Park?
They're not actually doing it, but they have an engineer that's working on it. And, you're talking about for the parking lot?
Yeah, well, the drainage for the area. The
So-
drainage is gonna make it viable, so
Yeah,
that,
so-
Drainage will by others,
yeah.
is that what you mean? Yeah.
So that's part of the parking lot that we're talking about, and, DPW right now, the stage they're at is sending a camera through the pipes to see where it goes. I guess they're doing that all over town, and that's part of the last thing on the list of, to go through and see where the water's going and not going, and baby steps on that parking lot, but that's where it's at.
Okay,
Yeah, this is the layout from that engineer that has
Yeah.
that.
okay, so, so the Sweeney Park is the immediate primary focus of what you wanna be doing, but you have a whole bunch of other projects in here as well.
Mhm.
Do you have an actual roadmap for when those other projects will land or might land? Or have you not even decided that any of those are just options? And
I mean, this is better, but we're first working on the big picture of the master plan, and then kind of breaking it down, so not really a timeline. But I knew if we wanted to get it started, we had to get started on the design phase, so the master plan hasn't even officially been approved yet, still part of the process. But I had asked for that capital money to start the design, so that when we're ready to start, we'll have that ready to go. But no timeline on anything really yet.
And typically, as part of the master planning process that Weston and Sampson does, we oftentimes try to create that, basically the capital planning for the next, basically whatever it would
Yeah,
be.
they'd use that.
5,
High
7,
school
10
would use
years.
this.
And we would
And
vet
that's
that as
the
well
younger
through that
kids.
process, and that might include breaking it
Because of
down,
the
design
size,
fee,
you can't
construction
get a full
basis.
field up
Or
there.
if it's appropriate to phase some of the
little ones, the
construction work
kicker
itself,
is
we could do
that-
that. And so we do wanna have that roadmap as part of the overall master plan report.
Okay. All right, so now let's talk about briefly the Brook Street field, and I just wanna, I'm asking really from a sort of a communication standpoint.
Okay.
Y'all looked at that particular field and its state. Have you actually been talking about any plans there, or?
No.
Okay, good, because my understanding is the school is
Right,
probably taking the lead on that, but
yes,
it will be on the hook for paying.
That's why we kinda stepped
We
back.
stepped, yeah.
Okay.
After the
Yeah.
initial assessment, you know.
Yeah.
steps, yeah.
Okay. All right,
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
the monies that are being asked for this year for design services, what's the figure that you're actually asking for? Because there's a lot of design money in this scattered about.
Yes, so originally, originally I was just trying to put a placeholder on it because we didn't have the numbers yet. So I put in with CPA and with the town capital budget, 100,000, assuming I knew it was going to be somewhere around there. So then as the numbers kind of started to tighten up, and leading more to the 1.5 million, which then brings up that 10% to more of $150,000 for design. It kind of morphed along the way. But we are also talking about possibly seeing what we could remove out of that design fees and put it more into the construction phase so that we could get closer to the 100 or the 105,000 for the design fees.
So what we did, if I could jump in, is if you look at that page of design, basic design services and supplemental services. So on the top part, you see 133 in total. So we suggested that we defer the construction documentation and the construction administration for now. That could be picked up while we're into a construction phase. So delete those two. And so we pick up the 26,600 and the 33,250, and then all of the 37,000 in the second block. And that comes to, I think, 104 altogether, which is what the ask is currently in the capital budget.
I see it coming to 97, but. So is this, let me just get one other clarification from you, that
Yeah.
the 133 that's over under the cost estimate of the project for design, that's this 133, same figure?
Correct, it's just breaking it down so you can see how that equates
Okay.
into the different phases.
And the $500,000 bathroom is not included?
Correct.
That's separate, right.
It does include a 10% contingency fee as well, which I think is important to note, but also wise to include.
What is mobilization?
Basically, it's saying, a contractor will basically say, we need to bring all of our stuff on site. It's essentially to help him acquire and get himself up and running, just in terms of from that capital expenditure point to start. So there's
Do we have to pay for that? For them getting ready?
it helps them do that. Yeah, well, yes, just in terms of, it's a pretty industry standard item.
Just curious.
Yeah, it's really just to help them kind of get the ball rolling. From a cost standpoint, securing subcontractors, things like that, materials, supplies. It's a lot of, it can be a large capital outlay at times.
Yep.
All right, other questions or comments from the board members right now?
What's the status of the bathroom facility recommendation?
That's really, it's an option for the town. It's one that doesn't have to go in right away. It can be phased over time. Bathrooms are often requested in many municipalities that we work with. However, building structures themselves are oftentimes not feasible for a lot of municipalities to deal with. Depends on what the capacity. We see some that absolutely do it and they do them very well. So
Right.
we see the gambit, but it's one of those to say that this is part of an option to say, here's where you could do it. This is the pricing we've seen to do it. And there's different avenues you can do, from prefab to stick-built, many different ways.
And as the parking rec committee, we think the bathrooms are very important, but for this master plan, we were trying to really just focus on the fields and then deal with the other bathroom and whatever other amenities separately.
But if you do that afterwards, that's gonna be digging up all the parking, right? And
I'm not sure that is definitely where it would go anyways.
The bathroom could be, yeah, the bathroom could relocate it if that's the case and if that's a need. Just because you want to make sure there is sewer in the street, so you'd have to tie into that. There's water on site, so that's good. Electrical's on site. But you'd want to not disturb your good work you just did.
yeah.
Yeah, by the time we get to this, we'll be past the 5-year moratorium on that paving, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
think I have exhausted my near-term questions.
Okay.
Yep. Everybody else?
I have one sort of odd question for you, Cheryl, and this is, you all probably know this. I'm just curious if we have any idea what the use per year on our fields, I mean, how many hours of field use, or is it in this one?
I think it's in the back of that booklet,
It's in
yeah.
there.
That was
Well, I
part of our
it was-
study ahead of
Couldn't
time.
read some of the numbers there that I
Oh.
got. What page?
Keep going. It's after. There's the first page after thank you. Yep. After that next slide. There it is.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw that, and this is hours, and I meant, do we know how many people use the fields?
Oh. I do, according to field permits, which is
Yeah.
what we got the
Yeah.
hours from. I don't have it
I
on
mean,
me right.
these are a lot of,
Right,
it's a lot of use, and that's why I was just curious if we knew.
right, and that's just
How
the
many
permitted
individuals?
use. There's obviously a lot of other use that is, unpermitted, whether it be playground or just kids down there or weekends. But I can get you the user numbers too, if you want.
I'm just curious, and I
Yeah.
would love to know.
Right, yeah. Well, each youth league has about 300 kids in it,
Mhm.
Anywhere from 300 to 400, and then the high school sports on top of that.
Yeah.
And all of the youth leagues use it, so. But of course, a lot of the kids are the same kids.
Yeah. And are there any out of town? I know don't adults use the fields as well?
Right now, there's not out-of-town use on that field. There is at Brook Street, but not at Sweeney right now.
I bring my kids here every now and then.
Classics doesn't count.
I would think the heaviest use is in the fall
Yes,
for Brook and Sweeney.
it is. And then, as you know, at Sweeney, even though, spring, they can't get out there for a month, so softball team ends up
This
away.
spring could be different.
This one could be different.
Yeah, but I would think the heaviest use of the turf fields are in the fall.
In the fall?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
With what happened with the Zika stuff last year, like, with the money being spent, how much utilization do we get out of these fields in light of what we saw last season, if that is a norm, let's say, because I'm not a epidemiologist, or whatever you call it, but I guess these things go in cycles, and there's estimated that we're living with us for like probably the next 3 to 5 years or something, I heard. So if we spend all this money, do we now have this beautiful field that because of natural conditions, we can't actually use?
That is possible. I know that we are looking to possibly change some of the spraying regulations, which, not like today, and I'm not doing it, but that we may end up spraying around the field. And then if not, and we do have the sundown restrictions, then we would still have the field to use until the sun sets.
Yeah, and I think since that's happened to us recently, we had some pretty creative scheduling models going so that there was an impact, but I don't think the impact ended up as deep as, the cuts to programs as deep as we were initially concerned it would happen. There was some creativity all around to get
And
everybody on,
cooperation.
to get everybody on for some time every day.
But does it change the order of these projects in any way? That because of this field having an environment that doesn't exist quite the same at the other locations, is that a reason to invest more heavily at the other locations until this thing plays itself out a little bit more, or?
I don't think so, because I think usually when those mandates go through of just closing the fields at a certain time, it's all of the fields. You know what I mean? If it gets to that level, it goes for all the fields anyways.
Yeah,
And the recommendation is always the bug spray and the long sleeves and all that, no matter which field you're on,
Right.
too.
yeah.
And also, to the point of fixing the drainage over there, it may help that larger problem of mosquitoes in that area and those deeper concerns there than on other fields, if we can get the,
All right, take some of that
if we can get
standing
the
water away.
drainage straightened out,
Mm,
finally.
be nice.
All right. I'm First of all, I know that there's a bunch of folks from the Parks and Rec committees and other committees who have been working on this for quite a while. So first of all, thank you for the time that you spent on this, because this is a difficult problem. We know it. We know you spent a lot of time on it. And I'm hopeful and confident that our residents are going to appreciate the time you spent. With that, any of you folks have any comments that you want to make regarding the plans or process? Feel free. And if not, that's fine too.
Speak now.
So, no? All right. Okay, well, so thank you, and we know that we're gonna be talking about this in the capital budget a little bit later on tonight, and I know FinCom has already been talking about it. And thanks for coming in tonight and giving us the rundown.
All right, thanks for the time, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
care.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Greg, it would make sense to get this packet to all the finance committee members too.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll send the updated one electronically.
great.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 3, annual town meeting and budget. We have two parts of this tonight. We're gonna review the proposed budget, and we'll be voting the final budgets at our next meeting, and giving our recommendations on the individual articles then as well. And we're also gonna review potential warrant articles tonight. So, Greg?
So in terms of the actual budget, in terms of the changes from the preliminary budget to where it stands now, there were a few changes in operating. I listed those in the memo to you. So just to run through those quickly, the pension amount was reduced by $23,000 based on a final number from Essex County. So that was helpful. In DPW, in the operating budget, $10,000 was added to the public tree line, and $10,000 was taken away from the vehicle repair line. So net, no change, but those two lines were altered by the one up 10,000, one down by 10,000. And then the other reduction was in the school operating budget, from the preliminary estimate to their proposed budget is a reduction of 45,000. So at that new total of 18,200,293. So those were the changes that were made in the operating budgets.
I know, we don't have a number from the vocational technical school yet, correct?
We have a budgeted number.
We do, we do. And,
We don't have a,
no, we don't have their even estimate yet.
hold on, let me just double check that before I speak. So I don't believe we do.
Okay,
So that, right, so what you have there is we level funded it,
okay.
because we were,
We don't know if we're up or down yet.
right, we're not
Okay.
anticipating,
Ah.
early indications are that we are not up.
Okay.
So those were the changes in the operating. I don't know if you have other questions or other areas that need to be revisited.
Are you gonna talk about capital?
Yes.
That's next.
So then in capital, I gave you a new sheet with the new numbers. And this was approved at the last FinCom meeting. And so the changes that were made from the original proposal So in DPW, the drainage sidewalk improvements line was reduced by 25,000 from 450 to 425. We added in the recommended column 10,000 for a management plan for the conservation lands, and to be combined with 20,000 from Community Preservation Funds, the CPC committee. And then also, we added 15,000 to planning zoning studies for a total of 25,000 instead of the 10 that was originally there. Further down, we removed the initial first phase approval for the Cornerstone Church. The Finance Committee felt it would be best to do that in one vote rather than splitting out into two. And we have a little bit of time as they do their fundraising, so that could happen at a future town meeting. In fire, the engine fund was reduced by 10,000, and we added a new line to replace the Zodiac, the mini rescue boat that's used on area ponds and lakes.
Greg?
So that new line was 6,500.
I had a question about the fire engine fund.
Yeah.
In the sheet that I have, it drops from 300,000 to 240.
Right, 250 was what we had shown in actual, so the original request was 300.
300, and so
And my initial recommendation in the
It was
preliminary was 250,
okay, thank you.
and then we dropped it to 240.
With the Zodiac, did anybody talk to, remember, it was suggested of maybe,
Yes, to talk to Browns to see if it could be salvaged, and no.
okay.
The answer came back negative.
Is that just the boat, or is that the boat and the engine? Because it doesn't seem very much like.
That's just the boat.
It's the boat,
The
yeah.
engine still is in good shape, and so we're using the engine in the trailer. So it's just the boat.
And so that's 6,500 as opposed to 7,000? I'd had that we had 7 in there.
We never had a number in there. I mean, at one point, we had estimated 7, but yeah, the final number is 65.
Is that net of surplus, or is that just the purchase with surplus of what's the existing one is?
The existing one
There's no
has no
value.
value.
Yeah, there's no value.
Yeah, it's the rubber shot on it. It's not holding air and too old and brittle to do anything with. I skipped over the Parks and Rec, so on that Sweeney Park, and I think that number is too high. I'm not sure why I thought it was 104, because it does come out to be just under 97 total. But anyways, the original ask, we had 150, we had dropped that to 75, and then we have further dropped that to 55 from the town, and then another 50 from Community Preservation Committee, and that 55 could drop down a little further, because 97,000 would be sufficient to do that preliminary design work. So it could be 47 instead of 55. And then lastly, the proposal to partially fund, or at least a town match, for the harbor master office, that has been deleted. The plans are not ready for presentation and vote. They're still working on the feasibility of that. And so that would come before folks at a future town meeting, not this one.
Is the feasibility, just out of curiosity, only focusing on that park location, or is the feasibility still including other locations?
It's looking at Reed Park and Masco,
And Masco?
right, both locations.
Because I noticed that didn't appear in this planning document, so they aren't in
So that's Parks
coordination.
and Rec.
So they have shared information.
Okay.
Right.
That you don't see it on
Yeah.
this, but yes, there's communication there and sharing of different ideas.
Okay.
So the Masco location is potentially behind the playground, between the playground and the parking lot.
Is the Masco location, does it include the bathroom? Because I noticed the bathroom estimates were for Sweeney here, but, so there is no bathroom proposal potentially down the road, or is that's still to be worked out between the two of them?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So those are the changes and the numbers as they stand. And again, if you have further questions to dive deeper if we need to, we certainly can. So bottom line, in terms of a tax increase, we're in the 2 to 2.5% range. If March is the same as February in terms of winter weather, I'd be pretty comfortable with a 2% increase, because we would not need a snow and ice, no snow and ice deficit to cover. But I shouldn't say that because I'll jinx it. So,
Good.
at this point, if things continue as they have, we could probably have a 2% increase rather than a 2.5% has been the norm of recent years.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So then the other set of numbers to review is what the Community Preservation Committee has proposed. And again, those were endorsed by the Finance Committee as well. And so if you're ready to move on, we can move on to those.
Mhm.
So want me to run through the list? So for open space and recreation, there is the $50,000 for the Sweeney Park design effort. There are three $4,000 asks to make various improvements, signage, water bubbler, water filler, and some lighting repair at the various parks, at Singing Beach, at Masco, and at Sweeney. So those are $4,000 each for a total of $12,000. And then there is general landscaping restoration at the various parks, including Tux Point. That's a $35,000 request. And then for the efforts to develop management plans for lands under jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission, the request was for 40, but the recommendation is 20,000, and there is another 10,000 in the capital budget. So those are the open space and recreation projects. Under community housing, the Affordable Housing Trust request was for 200,000. The CPC is recommending 150,000 for them to be able to use for future projects. And then there's an additional request for 8,500, and that is to update our what's called a housing production plan. We're required to update that plan every 5 years, and so it is due for renewal by this time next year. And so we can reach out to the consultant who helped us the first time to do an update to that based on new census data, et cetera, for 8,500. CPC has not formally voted on that. They will at their meeting next week. But indications are that they would be approving that. And then in the historic preservation bucket, if you will, there's continued restoration of the cemeteries for 35,000. There's a contribution, second contribution to the Veterans Honor Roll for out front here on the Common for 25,000. That's in addition to the 50,000 that was provided a couple of years ago. And then there's restoration work to Seaside 1, to the exterior, some woodwork and some painting for 39,000. And the First Parish Church has a request in, they requested 43.5. The committee is recommending 30,000 for restoring the railings up on the steeple. So those are the projects, and then there's the administrative fund that's up to 5%. So that's a $20,000 recommendation for any administrative expenses. So that's a grand total of, well, the 8,500 isn't in there, so, for, 424, 500, I believe.
Mhm.
So that was a quick run-through of all those projects. I don't know if you have questions that I could try to answer. I'm happy to if you have them.
How does a parking kiosk cost $30,000?
What's that? Come on.
So the original request was for 35,000, based on some older estimates. We did get newer estimates. The price of those displays have come down significantly. So they cost about 14,000 apiece at this point. But the committee did not recommend going forward with that. Both the CPC and the Finance Committee felt that would be best to wait for the parking study that we hope to complete this spring and summer, and then to revisit the idea once we have the recommendations of the parking study. I'm sorry, the original request was for just over 28,000.
Yeah.
I said 35.
Is that, I'm just curious, I don't want to auger into that, but that just, even 14,000, I mean, how, what do we,
So these are these park and display machines.
oh, okay, so it's, okay, I thought it was like a hut. You're talking about actual machinery.
Actual
Yes.
machinery, yes.
Got
This-
it.
This is,
Ah,
yeah, this is the
alright.
hardware.
Got it.
Yeah.
Do you want a motion to accept these?
Yep.
Anybody have any more questions? I'll make a motion to approve the CPC applications as presented.
Second. Oh,
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thought for a minute y'all were gonna leave me hanging there.
So I'm assuming then with the, that we don't have a lot of more questions on the budget, that you'll be ready to approve that at your next meeting.
So the next meeting, we'll just, department by department, we'll go through, or we can potentially do the whole thing, but there are some of us that are gonna recuse themselves from a few of the items, so it won't take too terribly long, because we've all been doing our homework and going to FinCom meetings in between, so. Okay, anything more on budget tonight?
That's all I had on budget.
All right, let's move on to the warrant. So,
So we do have a few
there you go.
I'm happy to make more copies. If people would like to, if they share, we can make more copies.
What was this one? Let's see.
So there's the one, just one-sided, and this is a two-sided. Eight or so? So you want to share, you do that, and then it's, you have that, and she makes some copies.
okay, so the documents that we're looking at tonight are draft documents, and we will be deciding, actually at the next meeting for sure, which of these are going on the warrant. We want to discuss tonight whether or not we want to continue moving forward with any or all of these articles. and raise any issues that need to be resolved before next meeting if we need to move forward. Greg, do you want to go through the articles related to the bylaw changes? And I'll have a couple of comments on the Alpers land purchase.
Sure. So why don't we start off with the possibility of a local room tax? So this is, we talked about it as targeting the short-term rentals, so the Airbnbs of the world that are operating. So it turns out that in order to tax Airbnbs, you need to first adopt the general local option of imposing up to a 6% surcharge on all rentals of rooms. Manchester has never adopted that general local option. Most of the towns around us have, and they've all adopted them at the maximum 6%. So that's decision number one. So if you want to move forward with any occupancy tax, then you need to adopt that first article. And you need to set the amount. So it's up to 6%.
So that covers the subsequent two articles that we're looking at tonight.
Correct. So there is that option of going above and beyond that. So in addition to the 6% room tax, there's also the local option of imposing an additional up to 3% impact fee, basically. Since we've never had the room tax, it makes sense to me just to do the room tax
Exactly.
and just leave it at that, and that covers everybody.
Mhm.
And to be clear, when we're talking short-term rental, we're working with a state definition of short-term rental here. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, so that picks up more than what we license.
Okay.
So that would eliminate the other two options on that page. So we would just have to do number one, and you need to decide at which level of taxation, up to 6%. Like I say, most communities do the full 6%. Some have done 4% in the area, but most are at 6%.
And I believe I saw a number somewhere, but what would 6% approximately,
You know, I don't have a good sense of that,
yeah,
just because we don't have a good handle on how many people are renting.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it's easily in 6 figures, but I just don't know for sure.
What constitutes a short-term rental under state law?
So I don't have that in front of me, which so I shouldn't venture probably too far down the road. But there's a threshold for, if you rent below that threshold, then you don't qualify. So many nights a year, and I'm not remembering what that number is, but I can certainly get it to you.
So it's not per rental, it's over the course of a year.
It's over the course of a year how often you have rented.
And how would the data to monitor and
Right.
collect that occur? I mean, when we were talking about this in terms of within the licenses that we give out, we were talking about Airbnb, and we were talking about Airbnb reports already to the state of Massachusetts, and the state of Massachusetts just tack on a local option, and we
Right.
would receive the money from the state of Massachusetts.
Correct.
How do we monitor this?
So, not easily. So right now, all people are required to be paying the state tax if they're doing a rental over those thresholds. Now, are there people who are not following that? I don't have a handle on that in terms of who is and who isn't. What we can do is monitor what we see being advertised, and then we can ask the state, are they collecting from X, Y, and Z property? So that's our one avenue of making sure that people are complying with the requirement to be collecting a tax.
But that's only if they're in compliance with the state.
Right, so if we have evidence, right, if we have evidence that someone is advertising and not paying to the state, then we can alert the state that we have reason to believe that property X is doing rentals, and you need to follow up state to make sure that you're collecting the tax from them.
On here it says fewer than 14 days in a calendar year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just didn't remember that number.
I couldn't remember either, but. And it talks about what the two people who were here earlier, what they had in terms of fire,
Public safety,
thank you.
Yeah.
Public safety certificate as well as the proof of insurance.
Yeah.
So again, the collection mechanism for this is the state actually collects.
correct, and then they cut us a check typically on a quarterly basis.
Well, that's not insignificant, the amount.
Questions and comments anymore?
Yeah.
I would say I don't think it would be, I don't see putting an additional tax on top.
The following two articles.
Right.
Right.
Certainly makes it a little bit more complicated to analyze in
Yep.
the short term, and
Yep.
very difficult to communicate effectively to the
Yeah.
residents in short term, whereas the first one is fairly straightforward to communicate.
And especially if we get to go through with the state, do it through the state.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would be comfortable at least advancing for the purposes of debate and discussion at town meeting floor, the first one. That one seems like it's straightforward enough for us to be able to have a useful conversation with the voters about. I would certainly feel a little bit less confident in our ability to do the second two right now.
We'd
So-
have to have handouts.
Yeah. So FinCom has not yet seen the actual text of this yet. Well, they have now, most of them. And they'll be discussing this at their next meeting. Any comments or thoughts on the 6% rate? And then we will take a little bit of a vote to see if we want to continue advancing this.
Is that what the neighboring towns do? They do the
Yeah,
6%?
Gloucester has 6% and Beverly has 6%. Gloucester moved forward with the additional 3%. Rockport has the 6% only. Essex, I think Essex was at 4%.
And do we have an expected outcome from this?
So it's a new revenue stream, general fund revenue. So
I mean, I just did cheat and looked at Airbnb, and there's 5 listings for Manchester, so how much money are we actually expecting?
So again, it's hard for me to estimate that, but I think it's a 6-figure number based on. So it wouldn't just pick up the Airbnbs; it would pick up others who are renting as well.
The state ought to be able to provide us with that data, right?
Yes, on an aggregate level, yes. They won't break it down by business, but they will give you aggregate.
Can we get that before the next meeting?
Yeah, we can certainly try, yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand, so we're not doing it necessarily with some sort of specific number in mind, we're doing it to do it.
Yeah, I see it as a way to try to provide some relief to the property tax.
But we don't know how much.
I don't,
Okay.
no.
Well, I'm inclined to keep this one alive for now. If we come up with numbers that don't, or get numbers from the state which don't suggest it's worth advancing, we can pull it at the next.
Is there any negative, any
Meeting.
downside to having it I mean, if it's just gonna provide income with not a lot of outlay and work.
Well, I guess there could be, potentially two negatives. One is we could be surprised and find out this is going to impact an enormous number of people and adversely so. The other is it could actually be a very, very small number and cause a lot of difficult political conversation for the sake of something very little. Those would be both negative. I don't think the likelihood is high of those, but it would be worth getting the aggregate numbers so that we have some measuring stick to see whether or not either of those is likely. Ms. Mellish,
Yeah, we were
Wait,
just
wait,
kinda looking at it
you're gonna have to
online.
come and get a microphone first. All right, I'll bring it to you.
Yeah, we were just kind of looking at it online, and it appears to us that it would apply to rentals of less than 31 days, so it should pick up all the weekly rentals that occur during the summer, which would be substantial, I would think.
14 days a year, so.
All right, why don't we try to move along here? So I think I think that there's consensus that we don't really want to move forward with the second two articles right now, just for the complexity issues. Can I get a motion to move forward with the local room occupancy excise tax article for the warrant?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And just to be clear, our final vote will be next meeting on this.
Mhm.
All right, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund change is,
Pretty a minor tweak. It really is just removing the necessity that's currently in the bylaw of recording the trustees' names in the registry of deeds. So that's the change, removing that requirement.
Question.
yes, sir.
Is it a legal requirement that vacancies have to be filled by a joint meeting of the original appointing authority and the remaining members of the housing trust?
It was my understanding it is yes.
Because
But-
it strikes me that the members of the housing trust are appointed, I think, 5 by the selectmen and 2 by me. This makes filling a vacancy much more complicated for all of us than making the original appointment. And I'm not quite sure that makes any sense. Can we find out the answer to that question for sure?
Yep.
Any other questions or comments from the board? All right, so can I get a motion to approve the amendments to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund article for the annual
Do-
town meeting warrant?
Do we need to wait and see what Greg can determine with Alan's question?
Oh, these votes tonight are to get it onto the warrant or to move forward for discussion at the FinCom and final approval at the next meeting. Or, yeah,
So if the answer is it's possible to change it, we could
It's just-
consider changing it.
Right, you still have time at your
Okay.
next meeting.
So moved.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next two.
Which I actually don't have. the list in
We're
front
on
of me.
The water.
lien on property for
Lien on property.
overdue and unpaid water service charges.
Right, so this is the article that would give us the authority to place a lien on a property that has outstanding utility bills that ultimately it's the responsibility of the property owner, not the tenant, to make sure that those bills are paid.
Is this something that we're running into, bumping up into?
Not a lot. It has happened, less than a handful of times
Mhm.
in my time here, but
Mhm.
when it happens, it doesn't seem fair.
Is this typical for towns to?
Right, so this is a local option that the state allows. So they anticipate that there is a need, and certainly many towns have adopted it.
Water service charges include both water and sewer?
Yes.
Discussion? Any other comments, thoughts? We've discussed this once before, already briefly, and there was
Right.
general support for it.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a housekeeping.
Mhm.
It's just, yeah.
Well, we
Alright.
shouldn't be stuck with the
Right.
bill.
So, motion to advance the,
So moved.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, last of the bylaw articles. Automatic sprinkler systems.
So this is a new issue that has come up, and I'm of a couple of, I'm of two minds on this one. I'm not sure we want to have this come up right now. It just may be very difficult to avoid getting into a protracted debate about a particular project. And so we may want to just hold off on this.
Yep.
I think long-term, it makes sense to have. I'm just not sure the timing.
How many
Would s-
units would,
So we only have
Fit this.
one boarding house in town.
right,
So it would apply to that.
Mhm.
So that's the negative.
They
It's-
wouldn't be grandfathered.
No, so they have 5 years to come into compliance. So it applies to
place too?
everybody. So that's the other
Mm-hmm.
consideration that you need to give here.
Right.
Um,
5 years on the grandfather side.
5 years on the grandfather. Any new lodging, boarding house has to have it before they get a C of O.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree. The,
Nope,
Timing?
may
I
not
don't-
be ready for the
The
debate.
timing's not right.
Mm-hmm.
If this is something that's going to be brought up in the future as a possible bylaw change, then the project you're referring to would have to be in compliance within 5 years.
Correct.
Are we just delaying the inevitable?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the. So then the land purchase, the Alpers lot or the Christian Hill lot, going by both names. So the article in front of you is very similar language to what we used in the fall when that one parcel was an existing town land was turned over to the Conservation Commission. And so you'll see the language in there that has the ability to still improve the old logging road. So the property that was approved at the fall town meeting abuts this property, and we're very close. And the same logging road on that property you approved in the fall, that same logging road continues and hits this property as well. So I think there's sound reasoning to continue that carve-out, if you will, to allow that logging road to potentially be improved to allow access into the interior of this whole area.
So when we talked about this property last time, we couldn't really get consensus on the board, and we really couldn't get consensus on the side of FinCom, in part because there wasn't a holistic plan in place with regard to the Western Woods, not something that could be clearly articulated. So over the past couple of months, there's been meetings of a working group with members of Finance Committee, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, Town Planner, Greg, and Board of Selectmen. I've been at those. And what came out of that were a few things. First of all, there's a document that's in your packet called Preserving the Western Woods, which is a little 2-page document that describes the like the 30 or 50,000 foot plan with respect to managing the Western Woods, what we want to do with the Western Woods. And it outlines the purposes for that, the intended purposes, as far as the master plans is concerned, and as far as the town's concerned for the Western Woods area. And it outlines the need for a forest stewardship plan, which provides a fairly detailed description of how the town should maintain and update the area, the set of parcels, so as to maintain it and to make it available for different recreational uses to residents. Another thing in your packet was a comment on the Christian Hill and Western Manchester Woods, which is a more detailed description of this parcel in particular that we're going to be voting on at town meeting. And then the last thing in the packet was a Western Woods ownership map, which has been, there have been different versions of this floating around, and at one point it was 2 or 3 different maps, and it's finally been collapsed together in one fairly easy to read map, which will have 1 or 2 more updates to, small updates to. And it specifically shows the Alpers lot on this map along with the other parcels and how they relate to each other, to give you an overview of what we're actually trying to do from a sort of a geographical standpoint in this area. So the idea is that these 3, at least these 3 short documents go to all the individual boards that were in these working groups who have a stake or interest in this particular project. And also, I would like for us to put those 3 documents into the packet that gets delivered with the warrant in the to everybody's door. It gives a more detailed overview of what our plans are for the Western Woods, so that everybody has an idea of what we're actually about. And then there's one last document that is really going to be for the boards, and I chatted with Sue Brown about that a little bit today. At the working group meetings, there are some discussions about a few specifics related to the Western Woods. One is the Alpers lot parcel is one parcel that we want to purchase now because it's private and it's really central to some of our plans here. There are some other parcels that are we'll have an interest in obtaining at some point to complete this larger collection of parcels that we want to conserve or otherwise have under control of the town for the purposes of preserving the Western Woods. And there's an interest as part of this holistic plan for us to have a roadmap, as much as we can put together a roadmap for, obtaining properties that are not actually ours. A roadmap for how we're gonna move over the next several years with respect to preservation. So, so that we won't have, where we'll minimize the amount of thrashing where maybe one committee or another comes forward late with parcels that are being proposed for purchase. The idea is to construct this document and have all the boards aware of and in agreement as much as possible over the next few years what our plans are for new acquisitions. Second item was it's one thing to have all these parcels. Part of the notion, though, is that residents need to or should have parking and access to the area. So we talk about conservation in town, and we say that we've said in the past that these woods are useful for recreation, hiking, and trails, but we've never really put together a detailed plan for how we're going to actually let residents or help residents do that. Part of the sports stewardship plan will do that, but one of the challenges is actually getting parking in place and access in place. And so over the next several months at least, we're going to have a certain amount of interaction with other boards trying to come up with a plan for that. And we're going to add that to a document that's going to be shared with the different boards in play so that everybody is aware of what we're really trying to do. And then a third item was the long-term management of this entire process. Once you put the forward stewardship plan in place, it's something which lives on for quite some time. It's not implemented all at once. Somebody has to manage that process long-term, and the town planner is taking the lead on describing that management plan, but there will be some discussions about who is actually going to be responsible for doing the work. And then the last thing I wanted to say about this was I have talked to the school committee. I'd hope to get in front of them before our March 2nd meeting, but it turns out their next meeting is March 3rd, so it'll have to be afterwards. In an effort to get as much of the community involved in this as possible, I talked to the chair of the school committee about possibly seeing to what extent the school could articulate areas where they'd be interested in using the Western Woods. So, for example, if the cross-country team wanted to make use of the Western Woods, or if there were any educational programs available through the Advanced Science Research program at the school, would they be able to use it? And part of that is if they can just give us some requirements and we can engage them in the process of building the forward stewardship plan, I think it will help the community overall to develop a stronger long-term plan for actually having a nice cohesive recreational space out there, recreational and educational space out there that's not just conserved but is actually also in use. So I'm going to be going to the school committee on March 3rd and see if I can get some sort of commitment from them to be engaged in this process, and if so, we'll communicate that to everybody along with this packet at town meeting in the context of this particular article, I think. That's my long-winded update regarding that working group.
Thank you.
Yep. So, we didn't come to a consensus in the fall over this land purchase. And so now I'm gonna open up for comments and questions on among board members now.
Well, I think one of the reasons we struggled to get to the consensus was this work hadn't been done.
Yep.
And now it has. The committee, the groups have spent time working it through, so I have no problem with it being on the warrant now.
I agree.
Mm.
I mean, you were very specific
Mm.
with what you wanted, and they've provided that.
Anybody else? Okay.
Is the question that was raised about having access to bring vehicles onto this land, was raised if the land was gonna be used for other than passive recreation and conservation? Is that still in play? I mean, we're keeping that portion of this article in place, and I'm wondering why.
You're wondering why?
I mean, if there's a need to do that for fire safety purposes, that's one thing, but if we're talking about further development of this land, is that still part of the plan that's being developed by the community of stakeholders that have been talking about the Western Woods?
Wasn't that a point, Arthur, didn't you bring that up, just wanting, in one of the meetings, keeping options open?
Right.
And that was something you brought up in one of the meetings regarding this, and that's why the wording was put in there this way.
I don't know.
That's okay.
So it is preserving options. If another access point is needed in the interior,
Right.
not, at this point, I don't see a need for that, but 50 years from now, it's hard to envision all the needs down the road. If one of the parcels within this 500 acres made sense for an athletic field, would you want that option
Right.
and be able to get access to it? Again, I'm not saying that's on the table right now, but again, 50 years from now, it's hard to say what the needs are. So there's some tension over that, preserving the options and 100% locking up the woodlands. So can go either way, but I think with the safeguards in there, in terms of it's only after consultation with the Conservation
Right.
Commission, and obviously you're still going to have to get it properly permitted, and it may be just as simple as putting some cinder on the old Woods Road so that you have public safety access, the fire
Mhm.
and rescue trucks or ATV can get in there easier. So it preserves that option.
I think, Eli, you outlined a vision that seemed to be kind of a town position, and I just want to make sure that we have validated everything that you outlined, because some of it was, I will admit, seemed like news to me, and I feel like I've been following this stuff. There's some assumptions in there that I think we should make really clear that the town supports, like the role of the town in doing conservation. And what does conservation mean? Does conservation mean protecting land as it exactly is, or does conservation mean securing land to migrate it into the direction of public use to the point of actually vehicle access? I mean, the definitions of conservation, there's a lot of room in what you described in your opening remarks.
You're right.
And I think we need to make clear, before we go in front of voters, what we're talking about when the town enters into conservation work.
Yeah.
And is it the town's role to be stepping into conservation work?
So a couple of things there. So in the past, when we've talked about conservation land as part of the master plan and as part of the public working groups, we've always talked about the notion of making that land available for hiking and passive recreation use. And there are a number of groups. There's the Cape Ann Trails, who actually, those are the people who put together this map that we're looking at tonight. There's the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust, which is for years done work on the trails in town. And there are a lot of groups that have been involved in this process who have iterated over and over again that passive recreation use is a goal of these properties. They specifically call out the attributes. If you look at the Christian Hills property description that was handed out, it's reiterated there as well. So the communication that we've been getting from the conservation groups year after year is these properties are great and people should visit them, and they're not just there because we want them to be locked up and unavailable and just sit there as woods. They want people to be able to use them. Part of the issue that we had with the different boards is that we did not have a holistic view of what we were trying to accomplish. And I think what I communicated was really us just taking the active steps of saying, well, we've been saying this for years. Let's put an actual plan around it and do it.
When you say we, my personal beliefs about conservation, I'm separating from what I see us in the position of doing, which is, in the way you just described it, is the town now taking on the work of these groups, which, by the way, independently have done fantastic things. And
I didn't say that necessarily. I said that the town
you
should.
you use the pronoun we.
I did. I did. And when I say do it, I don't really mean that necessarily the town itself is going to do all of the work for this. I mean that the town should at the very least be taking control of communicating this plan and this view, because it is town land. It's for the most part. And yes, and this is a group, a team effort with these different conservation groups. They're all going to be deeply involved in the work surrounding these properties.
I think we need to tighten some of the definitions, because, Greg just mentioned potentially this being used for athletic fields. So I think there's a use scope that needs to be much more tightened before we go to the town for the town getting more actively involved in conserving these lands and getting into the business of managing the usage of these lands. So, I'm not opposed to it. I'm not entirely comfortable with the definitions of what we're asking of people.
So the forest stewardship plan, there's a little bit of a roadmap in this document which discusses when that plan would be put together and how it would be done. There is some grant funding available that we're pursuing to go after that. There is a consultant who's doing this work for Essex right now already, who did a presentation to the group. And as part of the forest stewardship plan, fairly fine, detailed analysis of the area under consideration would be done, suggesting which parts could be used for what purposes. This is a relatively detailed undertaking. It would take many months to do. And that, I believe, is hopefully scheduled for next year. And it would be at the end of that that we would have the detailed plan that would describe which areas would be used, could be used for, or recommended for use for what types of recreation in there. So that's clearly not going to be available in advance of town meeting. However, we can communicate that there is a plan to develop that very detailed description of how we want to make use of the woods. In other words, we're now organized in our approach to this effort, as opposed to last year, we could not say that.
Okay. The only thing that I would flag would be the notion of conservation as a vehicle to develop. Because I don't think a lot of people would view conservation as a path to develop. If there is a project out there to come up with further usages of the land, then I think we need to present it as such, not necessarily as conservation. Because if there is an eye towards potentially using some of this land for other purposes, like a field or something that this person comes up with, then I think we need to present it as that flexible, not necessarily as conservation, because it could be interpreted as potentially deceptive optically, even if our intent isn't such. The second thing is there's a lot of, every path on here, even if no roads were to be built, every path on here passes through private unprotected land. So the dependency still on lands that are not within the reach of the public domain, even if I did use the we pronoun you used, it's still highly dependent on private unprotected property owners. So I do think we need to be realistic on how within the grasp the overall strategy is.
I think that there's actually, the blue areas in here are under conservation control. The protected open spaces largely under control of the MECT, which is a group that does want to work with us.
And the off-white ones are the ones I'm looking at, which all the paths at some point pass through.
Currently.
Currently. Yeah, so currently, there is a dependency on private, unprotected landowners to allow passage through land.
Yeah, and some of those properties, I can tell you right now, that the MECT is already engaged in purchasing, and others are properties that we may consider in the future.
Yeah, so I'm all 100% in the spirit of what we're trying to do. I just think we need to be really careful in our language and our current positioning as to where we really are. Because I think getting ahead of ourselves is, I don't think necessarily in the interest of the long-term plan, if in fact conservation is the goal.
Greg, this has been run through by town council, right?
The particular article, yes.
Yeah, and did they have any concerns about the language or the potential intention? I mean, any potential confusion?
So it's, the only potential conflict, and they don't think it is one because it's pretty de minimis in terms of total land area.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have Article 97 lands that have some carve-outs. They just want to be crystal clear with the state that they're okay with that. So they are running that by them.
Just in terms of, are there any, if you put property into conservation, are there any federal or state definitions or something that is guiding what this means?
So there is.
Am I being as
And
my
so recreational uses are consistent with their definition of conservation. So those are not antithetical. And there are plenty of examples of Article 97 lands that have ball fields or soccer fields on them. The Gloucester Mateos Field is one of them, softball field on an Article 97 land. So those two uses often are combined.
Mhm.
And in fact, under the Community Preservation Act, it's open space and recreation.
Mhm.
Those two go hand in glove often.
No pun intended.
Right. But to Arthur's point, it's good to be very clear to
Well-
people so that people don't hear one thing and, oftentimes people hear what they want to hear. So it's good to be extra clear.
Exactly, exactly.
It's always good to be extra clear.
Well, and I think Arthur's right. If there is the implication of another use at some point in time, then either that is made clear or we remove that.
Who's to say again, 50 years from now, there's a wonderful bike path all through the North Shore, and this would be a wonderful place for a paved bike path
Mhm.
going through this area. I think you want to preserve that option.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's a bad option.
No, I know you're not.
I-
You're just
I-
saying being clear.
I'm saying if we're gonna use public funds to do conservation, but we're thinking that down the road, we want the ability, the flexibility to use it for other purposes,
Be
that
clear
is
about that.
not what traditionally conservation is necessarily thought of, then I think we just need to be transparent about that.
Right, I agree 100%. You make a good
When I
point.
think of the Essex Conservation Land Trust across 128, I don't think of a future ball field. But we do need ball fields, so.
All right, well, I will spend time with Sue Brown, raising that point. As far as this article is concerned, we ready to move this forward?
Mhm.
I am.
Get a vote?
Take a motion on this warrant article as written for the Alpers land purchase.
Second the motion?
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right?
Any opposed? Okay. So that's what we have.
So I did get language in front of you in terms of the changing the date of town meeting and then
Oh,
and
right.
also town election.
Yeah.
We've talked about moving towards the fourth Monday of April. And then for elections, it would, to be on the safe side, it would be on the second Tuesday in June. So again, need to make sure people are comfortable with those dates. And
So one thing that was raised or mentioned, pointed out in FinCom was that will change the date of our actual town elections to point in time well after Essex's. And Essex does, so we set up our elections 35 days after, at least 35 days after annual town meeting, because that's the notification time. It's required. And the way Essex deals with this is they take their best shot at what is going to be needed to be on the ballot, and they put it there. And then if something doesn't go the way they expected or hoped at town meeting, it simply remains on the ballot, but would not take effect. So there are some disadvantages to us having our elections, our actual elections, significantly far away from Essex's. There are times when we have override votes where both towns have to vote, for example. And having one town vote significantly before another can be challenging. So that's the one concern that I have about this. And no, good luck getting Essex to move their town elections. I don't think that's gonna happen.
I mean, is the override question the only concern?
I don't know.
We just don't have override questions. Question.
Oh,
Obviously, if they want to change the school, the regional school agreement, that would be another case.
Yeah,
When it, major capital expenditures, that require bonding, rebuilding, whatever we do with the Essex Elementary School, the situation comes up fairly regularly.
yeah. So that's the one concern that I have, and gives me a little bit pause about jumping in and doing it. I sort of feel like we might want to vet it a little bit more. I'm gonna ask you to,
Could you just clarify the time difference today between Manchester and Essex versus what would be proposed? if we
I
were to move our zone?
believe that we're very close, like 1 day
I
separate.
think we're 1 day apart on our elections. So they do the third Monday in May, and we do the third Tuesday in May. I think I have that right.
mm,
They don't have to have a 35-day notification?
Well, they do, but, so, as Eli was saying, they take their best guess as to what they think will happen at town meeting, and sometimes they have ballot questions that are moot, because it's been nullified by the action at town meeting.
So for example, suppose that we stuck with our current election dates, but we moved the town meeting date out. And we had on the town meeting a vote for funding some capital project that was gonna require bonding. And so we need to put a bonding measure on the ballot. Well, so we need to post that 35 days in advance of the election. We do so when we don't know the outcome of the election, so we put the bonding measure on the ballot for, let's say, just for fun, $5 million bond, right? And then at town meeting floor, the voters do not approve the measure. So regardless of the outcome at the ballot box, there's no effect. So that actually can lead to a fair amount of confusion and tension, because people going to the ballot box not understanding that, yeah, they could get upset. And they could get upset at the outcome depending on the way they voted at the ballot box. It could be, it would require a certain amount of cultural retraining.
Although as a practical matter, that kind of outcome is pretty unlikely, because that question at town meeting would be a majority vote, and the question on the ballot would be a 2/3 vote. So the likelihood of getting a negative vote at town meeting and a positive vote by 2/3 at the election is, I think, pretty small.
That's true. How do you feel about the confusion aspect?
I don't like it.
All right, I need a little bit more feedback from folks.
well, Ann, in my mind, raised some strong points of issues other than override questions that can come up, in terms of having to have the two towns be voting in fairly close proximity to each other. I mean, just straight up in terms of the regional school district alone.
And that's the biggest reason to change it, though, is to get more time to have actual numbers in terms of that big chunk of the budget.
Yeah.
So,
How do you weigh?
yeah, what's more beneficial?
Yeah, I don't know. And that's part of the problem, right? And we
Okay.
went back and forth and had a few more meetings with the school discussing the impacts both ways, I'd feel better. I feel fuzzy on this.
Well-
Can you elaborate what the negatives are of us trailing Essex by 2 weeks?
So on a combined vote, I think you could think of it almost like this. Suppose you went to vote at Manchester ballots, and people throughout the day voted, and then at noon, the town went around with loudspeakers saying, the vote so far is 400 to 200 on this particular issue. How do you think do you think that would be, first of all, I think that would be straight up illegal.
I don't think that would happen.
Let's go exit
Yeah,
But that is sort of the effect of where you have two towns voting on the same issue, where both towns have to vote in favor of a particular issue in order for it to carry. And yes, the information is out there for one town one day ahead of, but it isn't communicated quite as broadly to the voters. Whereas if you have a 2-week interval, there's a lot of time for people to discuss and think about the outcome of one town's vote versus another. And I don't necessarily think that it's bad, but I'm not sure that I have a full grasp of the impact, and so I'm reluctant to inject it.
so we have a neighboring district of 2 in Hamilton and Wenham. How do they approach it?
I don't know for sure. I can
But
find
that might
out.
help us
Yeah, I can
to
find out.
see, I mean, and there's other regional school districts, not, I think we in Essex and Hamilton and Wenham are the only district of 2s, but there's district of 3s as well. It'd be interesting to see how some of those other communities and districts handle it. Triton Regional is a district and Pentucket is a regional district.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see how they approach it.
So, can I take it from our conversation so far that we're not jumping up and down to advance this one right now?
Well, I think we've raised questions and concerns, so it's more data before I could
Go one way or the
feel,
other?
yeah.
I think
We-
the point that Muffin just made is a really important one, that there are other regional school
Right.
districts and other regional entities that have perhaps different polling times. And I think that we need to have that information and see how that's worked.
All right.
Could help.
Or
So
confuse us
we'll try
more.
to get more information, and you have one more shot, one more
Yeah,
opportunity to decide, and if we don't have enough information, then we push it off for another town meeting. So. That's fine.
All right. Does that take care of the warrant articles?
Yes.
And I think that takes care of our annual town meeting and budget line item, agenda item. So you are welcome to go home and relax. Or you could stay. We have exciting correspondence coming up.
I'd love to stay, but
yeah, but
But bye.
Charlotte.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight.
thank you,
Yeah.
Alan.
pleasure.
All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, the consent agenda, Board of Selectmen minutes from February 3rd. A couple of us sent email out with some changes. Is everybody happy with those so far? All right, can I get a motion
I'll
to
make a
approve?
motion to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Any
As
discussion?
it's all been amended though, right?
Yes,
Yes.
consent agenda is
As
amended, yeah.
amended.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, correspondence. Oh, my gosh. So, yes, Xfinity is changing prices.
Did we ever get a letter off to them last
It's like a
time?
bi-weekly thing.
Did you get that? Remember, Jeff, you wanted a letter to
Yeah, no,
go?
No, I'm sure there's been other,
There've been a few other things going
Yeah.
on.
So that's on, you're gonna follow up on that, yeah. Letter from Friends of Manchester, Friends of Manchester Trees, Inc. regarding, request
stipend.
for a stipend for the town tree warden. And legislative breakfast meeting on March 13th for MMA. So anybody who wants to go to that,
Greg, what time is that? What time does it start?
8 o'clock,
are you going to that one?
yes.
Well, we're hosting it. It's at the Masonic Temple, Masonic Hall.
Probably better
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, it'd be great if a couple of you could attend.
Yeah, March 13th, Tuesday.
Nope,
No,
it's a Friday.
It's a Friday.
Friday the
Friday.
13th.
I should be able to go to that.
March.
Yep.
Out of the country.
Okay. We got two of us so
And
far.
All right.
I'm flying home from somewhere the night before, but I'm gonna
Me too.
try to get up and,
I can go
time
to
you
that.
getting in?
I don't know, right? 10:30 maybe?
Oh, midnight,
How about you?
shoot.
Oh,
So just
sorry.
look at your schedules and
Right.
confirm with Sonia if you could.
Right.
And then
Okay,
we'll,
Just
we'll
confirm with Sonia, or do we have to pass this?
so she could register all of us.
yeah,
Look at
especially
you
since
go.
we're hosting. I will say they are informative. Folks will come from all around the area and share ideas and whatnot.
All right. Town Administrator's Report.
I have a question about this letter from Sue Mittenmar. Is this something that we take up in budget, or what?
Yes, it would be.
But we're not talking about it.
Well, this came in pretty late. FinCom hasn't seen this yet, I don't think. This is a request to add a stipend for the town tree warden. I think in this budget cycle, it's gonna be pretty hard to, well, I mean, we could do it, but
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that could be handled within the existing DPW
That's
budget.
what I wondered, right.
So if there was a desire to do it, I think we could make it happen. So I was gonna
Without
talk to
adjusting
the
the budget.
FinCom about it, and then I didn't see a strong need to increase the budget by 3,000.
Mhm.
so we can discuss it at our final this next week, no, 2 weeks from now.
And we will have heard from FinCom
FinCom.
will weigh in on that and we'll get a little more.
All right?
Yep.
Okay.
Bless.
Yeah.
So I can go through this fairly quickly, pretty self-explanatory in terms of the items here, so complete streets. We do have a green light from the state and from our contractor to proceed with those intersections. There is a meeting, I think it's actually 6:30, not 6, on the 27th, to meet with residents who expressed some concern about the intersection at C, Washington and Summer, just to go over that layout.
Where is that meeting?
That'll be here.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So we'll have a review of the design and hopefully be able to answer people's questions as to why it's laid out the way it is. And then we'll give you feedback at your meeting on the 2nd, where we hope to continue to proceed. So at some point, we'll have to make a decision about the Beach Street sidewalk as well.
And should some of us be in attendance at that meeting
Uh,
on the 27th?
Sure, it'd be very helpful. Yeah.
Where is it?
It'll be here
Here.
at Town Hall. Yep.
And
Uh,
6:30.
6:30,
Not
not 6,
6.
yeah.
Greg, one question. Does that mean we are proceeding? The town is proceeding with these projects?
It means
Gail,
that
do you have
we,
his name?
I'm
Sorry.
My name's Parker.
so it means that we have got, more information so that we can go back and have discussions. It does not mean that we have, voted to move forward with a particular project or another.
Is there a timetable for that procedure?
Yeah, so we really need to make that decision at the meeting on the 2nd, March 2nd. At least with the at least for the
The
intersections.
intersection work.
So moving on, compost facility engineering, just an update is getting underway, a little, lost a couple weeks here, couple, 3, 4 weeks. But that is underway and the design work will advance and the permitting underway. The goal will be to have all that completed and have a project, a construction start date, assuming it all is a go, after design and permitting. That'd be a fall construction project. Circling back, some speed limit work, we need to get that back on your agenda and have you approve some of those modifications that the study committee came up with. So we'll do some PR work on that to see if we get any additional feedback from residents, and then put that on an agenda, probably April timeframe. There's some new work, North Shore wide. A number of the communities are looking at aggregation program. This is where people can pool their buying power and get a better deal from supply companies for electricity. And usually you can get a greener mix or a greener source of your electricity as well.
Yes,
Gloucester
Sierra
has,
Club's been promoting that for ages, trying to
Yeah.
get people to, when I went to one of the meetings for the town, that was one of their suggestions,
Yeah,
especially,
yeah.
yeah.
so Gloucester has done this, Salem has done it, and so if we can get those communities on the same timeline as us, then we can all be out to bid at the same time. That give us some enhanced buying power. And so, something to stay tuned on. And it would require a town meeting vote to allow it, but we could do that at a fall town meeting if things were moving along.
Mhm.
Would this be the equivalent of becoming not a generator, but a municipal utility?
No, it's not to that level. That's a different level of effort and work. This is really basically a group purchasing program.
Is MEP active on this?
They haven't been involved quite yet. I let them know, and I'll certainly give them an update in terms of a subsequent meeting. We're hopeful that MAPC will provide some technical assistance to help move this along. And if so, then there'll be some future meetings that I'll make sure people know about. And then fire chief search, will be getting that re-advertisement going soon, and met with a consultant today and get a proposal from him so we can compare a couple proposals.
Okay.
So that'll keep moving hopefully forward in the next little while. So that'll do for now.
Can I ask a question on the compost? You jumped over it, but you went through it, but I just didn't have a chance to ask. On the engineering, is that completely in conjunction with Black Earth, or is there any independent considerations for the town's sake? I'm particularly thinking about the food waste part, and just making sure the town has kind of good, better, worst case scenario with that engineering design.
Right, so the engineer's hired by us and worked for us.
Okay.
And so yes, we're asking for that independent
Got it,
consultation to us.
okay.
Yep.
So they're gonna look at which way the wind blows?
Right. Yes. Yes, exactly. So I think all that's left is a executive session.
Mhm.
No other matters in anybody's.
No.
So, at this point, I will take a motion to move into executive session, not to return to open session.
And can we take 2
Under
minutes?
Massachusetts
Because we gotta clean up and put mics.
General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, subparagraph 3, to discuss strategy with respect to possible litigation and discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining, and the chair so declares.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, Mr. Stein.
Yes.
Mr. Bowling, yes. Ms. Driscoll.
Yes.
Ms. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Bodmer Turner.
Yes.
All right.